There we go. Right. Hello. How are we doing, guys?
Oh,
Very well.
So I'll do a quick 30-second spiel for anyone who might be beginning to join, if anyone joins. Basically, what this is I have been, every single video on my channel, I've somehow snuck in 2 references. It's always been a reference to Malazan Book of the Fallen, and there's always been a reference to Dungeon Crawler Carl. I could be talking about flipping manga from 30 years ago, and I'll somehow sneak a Dungeon Crawler Carl reference in. And I have recently just finished my reread of This Inevitable Ruin. And I'm going to do a spoiler video. I think I will do a spoiler review. But to be honest, I think more importantly would be to have people who actually want to talk about the series, and more specifically this book. So I'm seeing lots of sort of discussions of people saying they're reading this book. But I don't know about you guys. I haven't seen anyone actually say anything spoilerific about this series.
I think because it's so recent. I mean, we talked about it a week or so ago, and we were like, oh, not everybody will have finished it yet. We better leave that alone. Yes. But we both desperately want to talk about it.
And you know what? The book's actually been out for about 3 months now in the big brick version.
But I totally get why people waited for the audio.
Yes.
Yeah, vast majority of readers waited for the audio. And
there was no way I was waiting. I needed to know. I cannot wait. The second it came out on ebook, it was on my Kindle, and I was glued. Because
I needed the version. Yeah.
I was planning to wait for the audio because that's how I first experienced all of them.
Yep.
And I just couldn't. I couldn't last like the 3 months.
Yeah. Knowing the story was there.
I just had to, and like I even used some of the audio from Jeff Hayes's like live streams that he was doing from the beginning. And so I was getting the beginning of it, and I'm like, I cannot stop there. I just got to continue. And this series just has been the biggest surprise of my entire reading life, honestly.
Yes.
Because going into this, I did not think the whole subgenre of lit RPG would be for me. I'm not a big RPG gamer. The idea of like video game style books wasn't too appealing. And then I tried it because I kept on hearing, and it blew me away. I got so emotionally attached so quickly. It became one of my favorite series of all time, and I'm obsessed. I might just be able to read or listen to this just on loop for the rest of my life and be happy.
Can I be forthright? I would go further. I would say that this is a silly looking series. You know, it's not even like, oh, maybe not for me. This looks ridiculous.
Yes.
You know, it looks great, but it also looks ridiculous. And so, yeah, I wanted to have a group discussion on it. And so I reached out with yourself, Ben, and then you said Derri absolutely has to come on as well. And here we are. So this was going to be like not offline, but, pre-recorded video. And we thought, hey, let's just make a live chat, and then we can throw it up afterwards. Would you guys, Brian, before we get stuck into it, just introduce yourselves very quickly? Can we do that?
Yeah. I'm Derri. My channel is Derri's Read It Before. I was talking to David beforehand that's because I have some mental health issues, and it meant that for the longest time it was almost impossible to read new books. So I reread books all the time, and this has been a gift from heaven because it fell into my head like it was born to be there, and I'm on my 6th read since August of last year.
I was laughing.
Yeah.
Including This Inevitable Ruin.
This will be my 3rd read of Inevitable Ruin.
Okay. Wow.
I love it. That's dedication to the series right there. And I'm Ben from Books with Benghis Kahn, and I've become a DCC super fan, as I was alluding to before. And I listened to this whole thing about 1.5 years ago now, and was so obsessed I just listened to it on loop a second time. Then when the hardcover started coming out, I grabbed those and wanted to do a print read and experience it differently, which was great. I love that, and even catching every tiny little detail that I might have missed in the audio, and so that's been great. And so I've done all of them 3 times, except for This Inevitable Ruin, which I've just done twice, and that's the freshest though. So I can't wait to get into the nitty gritty spoiler chatting on that book.
Do you know, Jeff Hayes deserves all the credit he gets for his narration. However, However, you did strike a chord with something you just said, Ben, because as marvelous as Jeff Hayes is, and he's magnificent, he's the best in the business, there is something quite nice about reading it on the page as well. Just opening up and kind of seeing all that, especially for a lit RPG book, seeing the statistics and the bold and the formatting, it is a joy to read on the page as well.
Yeah.
I did that when I obviously for the 7th book I read that on ebook first because there was a wait between the ebook and the audio, and so I thought, I better read a couple to get my head used to reading it with my eyeballs.
Yes.
And I really like being able to sort of skim those stats and being able to jump back to them when there would be something I'd be thinking, hang on a minute, when did they get that? And being able to just easily skip back to where it was, because you can't find those things on audio. But having listened to them first, it's also great because you can hear Jeff Hayes while you're eyeballing it.
Yes.
I hear Donut in Jeff Hayes' voice when I'm looking at the page. So
when the series comes out, I'm desperately hoping that they're going to cast Jeff Hayes as Donut. It'd be a missed opportunity.
Oh, they must.
The AI. Yeah. This is going to be a completely spoiler discussion, by the way. That's not. We're just going to get stuck in. Nothing is off the table. Speculation for future books too. It's all on the table. Guys, tell me your first your impressions of the book. Do you love it to pieces? Are there any quibbles? And where would you rank it in the pecking order of DCC?
Ooh. I loved it to pieces. So this book it has some baggage for people coming into it because the idea of faction wars has been foreshadowed for a long time, many books ago. Every book we start hearing about it.
Built up.
And then it builds to a crescendo by the end of book 6, Bedlam Bride. And so there's this huge expectation around this being a big, huge, kind of impossible challenge for them to get through. So it has to live up to some big expectations. And honestly, Dinniman exceeded them for me because the way that he handled the spectacle, the pacing of that with quiet moments, the variety of challenges that they overcome. I was just a kid in a candy store reading this book the entire time. I have no clue what's coming next, and it was always something even crazier than I could have possibly imagined. And the zaniness, the crassness, just all the different notes he was plucking, I was enjoying every one. And I love that it's just a different flavor than we've gotten before from the series, and continuing to expand out the named characters that we actually get to know, the POVs, the different political factions, that it's going bigger, and I was ready for it. So this is definitely among my favorites. I haven't internally ranked them yet, but I might put it as my second favorite. So like Gate of the Feral Gods is it was the first one that felt like that was the perfect read for me, where I had no quibbles. So that one is like maybe my favorite still. But all the other books, I have some like minor quibbles here and there. So I'd probably put this one second because it was just amazing. I have no major quibbles with it at all.
Okay.
See, I'm not somebody who ranks individual books in a series. I tend to just treat it as one thing. It's one story that either gets better or gets worse or dips or rises. But like Ben said, the foreshadowing for Inevitable Ruin has just been building since so early in the series that when you get here, you're like, okay, this could go really well or it could go really badly. And it very quickly lands on its feet and you're like, oh my gosh, you are up and running, and it's full chaos, crazy, hilarious, dramatic from the first moment. And I began my Goodreads review with, well, Faction Wars is all carved up because it's never been seen before in the dungeon, and it was glorious. And Dinniman was able to keep so many balls in the air with the drama of this story. There are so many smaller stories going on, and he manages to keep you invested in all of them. You don't get tired of any of them, and he brings in new threads. When he brought in the War Mages, my jaw nearly fell off. I was like, what? Now we have this whole new thing that we have to think about. And obviously I've reread since, and they were being talked about in book 3.
Oh wow, I didn't remember that.
He was building the war mages because they encountered them on the trains as war mages trying to build up their armies. And I was like, okay, I feel really safe that this author has a plan. Yes. He may not be one that's got it down to the finest detail, but he knows where he's going with this.
And he's a master of continuity.
It's so reassuring.
Yes.
Between books, I love how he starts every book by picking up on all the details of the threads from the previous book. We start with a reset. We deal with the achievements and the loot from the previous climactic sequence. And even little things like, we still have to deal with Carl's jacket that he hadn't released the power of, and from the back patch. And so he releases that against was it one of the one of the sharks at the beginning? Dinniman he's such a great attention to detail on everything within a book and between the books, so that we get that continuity, and everything feels like it pays off or comes back around. It is important for later, and so you need to be paying attention to everything.
Yeah, I do have one little quibble, and it started for me in Bedlam Bride, and it's a writing tick that Dinniman has, and it's where he sort of leaves a scene before Carl does, and something has continued to happen, and he just doesn't tell you until later, where something massive will go on, and there'll be lots of things, and you'll have forgotten that he's left a situation, and then he goes, "Oh, but hang on, back then." Something important happened, and he brings up this past scene that alters the perspective of what you've just read. And I don't know if it was because there were 2 or 3 of those quite close together, but I was like, okay, could you not just tell us the story or leave that scene out completely rather than give me the teaser? Because I just noticed it. This is not me complaining, because it's genius. It was just that I noticed it, and it's rare for me to notice a writing tick, because
it's how I Met Your Mother style storytelling, isn't it?
Yeah.
How I Met Your Mother does the same thing. I'm going to compare it to something totally different in a totally different genre.
It is that sense of flashback.
Yeah. I think for me, I would put it second. If I was going to rank them, I would put book 5 at the top. I think book 5 has the best character moments. Book 5 is Donut's book, and I would die for Donuts. Yeah,
I can't argue with you. Book 5 on the character moments or on the excitement of the hunt, of Carl going on as the predator, of becoming the hunter.
That sense,
that has so much kind of satisfying plot propulsion with a sense of danger to it. And book 5 just wasn't perfect for me with the quest stuff that got brought back with Signet. I thought that kind of slowed down the
emotion hit a real peak for me, though.
But it did. It did. The climactic sequence at the castle at the masquerade is just insane. So I can't complain if you have book 5 first.
Here's how I would articulate book 7 though. The image that keeps coming into my mind. Hi Chris, be careful. This is a spoiler chat. So if you're looking into Dungeon Crawler Carl, I would dip out just to. Lovely to see you. I think you're going to be really enjoying Dungeon Crawler Carl, mate. So don't spoil it for yourself at the same time, okay? Good to see you. What you can do is you can watch this. Yeah, because Chris, but his channel's really interesting. Complete tangent. Chris has got really interesting channel as well. What he's done is he's literally started reading this year, and so he's booktubing his whole career as a beginner reader, which is fantastic. But yeah, good to see you, Chris. Sorry for kicking you out. He's worth it going as well. I'm just going to put his channel very quickly on the page so that people can see him. Yeah, so I'm thinking more people will probably come to this once they've finished the book themselves. Here's how I would articulate my understanding of this inevitable ruin. It is a Jenga tower that has stretched up so high. All the pieces have come out, and now what you have is this thing that is just tottering and about to fall down. And my worry as I was reading book 7 is this thing going to collapse under its own weight? And I think my answer is nearly. But it doesn't.
And that's fair, I think.
Yeah. It's got so much going on. The pacing, I think all of Dinniman's pacing is a bit weird, because deliberately so. He doesn't really do rising action and then the falling. He has just a bunch of stressful, really enjoyable moments scattered throughout the book. And the last 50 pages are kind of more of like the denouement, see you in the next one. But this book has so many things going on. I actually, before we decided to hang out, I actually wrote down each main event in the book in a big line. and there are just
so many.
If you don't actually go back and chart them out, you've forgotten them. So now that we're going into spoilers, I'll talk about any of them. The showdown with Rust, moving into the Desperado Club, moving into the standoff with the Nagas, and then going into this all big war-out brawl with them, the War Mages, Louis getting captured, a showdown with Houston, standoff with a bunch of gods, Lucia Mar showdown leading into a dragon fight. That all happens in about 175 pages.
Yeah. It's insane.
Yeah, and I don't know how he's able to pull it off, but for me, he does.
And what's interesting is that, like, when I think retrospectively about the biggest spectacles of the book, I don't even think you mentioned them. There's the trench warfare sequence, which is a huge battle set piece towards the beginning of the actual faction wars kicking off. Then there's the big sequence in my head in the kind of middle of the book is the kind of invasion of the Desperado Club and their big plan, and how that goes absolutely haywire with all the gods getting released. And then I mean, you probably hit on some of the ones later, but then there's just so many later. But
they really are.
Those two master sequences, I love how we know coming in that this faction wars is basically like a stacked deck against the crawlers. It's an impossible task, even with them having extra cavalry coming in. I was just gonna say, like, they have been boosted, but the other sides are allied against them. They have their own mercenary armies. They have experience with this, and so it feels like there's so many challenges that we have to defeat somehow by the end of this book, like 8 enemy factions.
Yep.
Somehow make sure we exterminate all of the royal line of the Naga, who are very mysterious, and like
the NPCs.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because somehow
halfway through the floor that everyone's going to die.
Yeah. Somehow win the contest while still like helping the NPC team out.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like there's all these challenges. And what I love about the book is that some of them were incredibly hard for Carl and company to actually deal with. And then others are dealt with in interesting, creative ways that actually weren't so hard. Like it goes from, like the trench warfare scene, like that took incredible planning and effort and danger, and lots of people got lost in that, but that was a success. But then there's other ones like storming the Naga castle, or no, sorry, not Naga, Donadia, storming the Prism castle.
Yeah, that's such a good scene as well. Yeah.
That wasn't difficult for them. I love that some of these weren't impossible puzzles. It wasn't just like one impossible thing after the next. It was like, no, they're
well within their capabilities.
Yeah. And then some of them also were solved by not Carl. Like, so like the
Nagas.
How, and then what was the cookbook author who was in the tank who kind of went on a suicide mission?
Voltaire, something like that. Voltaire?
Yeah, Voltaire. So like Voltaire basically took out one of the factions themselves without Carl even knowing about it.
That whole army. It was beautiful.
That was an incredible little POV where
it was really sad.
Really sad.
There are so many moments. Yeah. Sorry, continue.
Oh no, just I love the variety of how these challenges get overcome. That some were due to their ingenuity and some were really tough to get through. Others were easier. That it didn't feel samey. Everything felt very different and unique in terms of how they overcame each challenge. And some like the other teams kind of did themselves in, like when they tried to outsmart Carl and by teleporting him once he was sent unconscious into the memory. So like they thought they were going to be able to take him out, but then that kind of messed them up when it didn't work. And so I love that there's just this variety to it. And another thing I just want to throw out there is that something that keeps the stakes so high for me and makes me continually so invested in the whole series is that it's not just chaos, and it's not just anyone can do everything. It's like the presence of the AI makes certain that like people actually have to follow rules. And the adjutants, like I love the adjutants in here. Like they actually help enforce the rules fairly for all teams. I love that there's a sense of fairness to this. It makes from the reader, I think, just more satisfying and easier to get invested, knowing that there's some rule set, some sense of fairness that adjutants, that the AI is able to enforce. And so that helps me I think it not just feels so random and chaotic, like anything possible can happen. It's something I actually like about like Squid Game, the TV show, is that like most of the time, people, the rules have to get followed in the different survival games, and the the people like running it are actually running it at least according to their rules, and trying to make it fair most of the time. And I find for this kind of survival stake situation that really helps me fully care about everything.
Yeah.
Do you know it? Have you guys read the Dresden Files?
I was going to say, I compare this to Battleground.
I won't I won't spoil it, but I think some of the criticism of Battleground, the most recent Dresden File book, is that there's so much going on, but a lot of people find that book quite mushy. The scenes sort of stick together into this big clump, and the whole thing kind of falls apart. And I love the Dresden Files. But I think this book handles what the Dresden Files was attempting to do in that book a little bit better, and it's exactly because of what you said, Ben. Because there are basically, I would say this whole book is just I was going to say a word I probably should have said, but basically just it's continuous action for about 500 pages, but it handles it really well, because what it does is it bookends these action heavy moments with different kinds of action. So you do have trench warfare, and then you have but that is before the weird kind of drug-induced standoff. And those two scenes are both highly climactic, but they're distant enough from each other that you do not feel that there is a clumping of scenes together happening. So I think
they all have their own unique flavor. They all stand separately as events within the timeline. And as we were talking, I was thinking this was the issue that Battleground has for a lot of readers, because it's all very samey. It doesn't matter what they're fighting the same way. Whereas in this one, every little moment of the battle requires a different technique, requires a different strategy, because they're up against these different factions and different intelligence sort of vectors. And what I really enjoyed was because of course Carl doesn't know at the beginning of the book that there's this massive warship full of ex-crawlers that's just arrived that have gone, we're going to be in your army. And so when he shows up at his headquarters and they're all there, the sense of relief he feels that it's not all just on his shoulders is beautiful.
Yes.
Because you genuinely feel that sense of, okay, I don't have to do all the planning. Marvelous. And there is this sense.
That's one of my favorite moments in the whole series. Yeah.
Their own agendas. These people have come back with their own axes to grind.
Yes.
Which brings more conflict into the story, because they're not all necessarily working in exactly the same direction.
Yes.
We get Juicebox with the NPCs. While they're allies, she's keeping a hell of a lot close to her chest, where she isn't being fully trusting. And it takes one of the ex-crawlers to say, you need to open this up. We have to be on the same page here. They will help you do this, before she does sort of let go of some of that control. Because for quite a long portion of the book, you're not entirely sure if Juicebox is on board.
Yeah.
I love that about this book. Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
That was brilliant. So there are all these elements that add different flavors to the different situations, depending which factions are being involved. When we get the War Mages show up, and Agatha show up, and we're like, what is even happening right now? So many things that it becomes really intricate, and it could have become a tangled, confusing mess of story. But all of those threads stay very clear. Everybody's objective remains clear, and it works, because they do all have a slightly different flavor. And you can follow it without getting confused. It doesn't get mushy in your head. And that is some talent to be able to do that. I am so impressed. We have Donut, who for the previous 6 books has had a constitution so low, she has to be protected all the time.
Yeah.
When they gain Quan H's cloak at the end of the previous floor, and they can now raise her constitution to the level of her charisma.
Yes.
off the charts.
Yeah.
Suddenly she becomes an incredible power that doesn't need protecting anymore. And that's such a shift in the dynamic for Carl. You see him struggling with it, to let her be.
He's still trying to
out
look
there.
after her. Yeah.
Yeah. And
But to some extent, he still does have to look after her. But to some extent, he still does have to look after her. Because she's so emotionally vulnerable at the same time. I think that's something really good about their dynamic, because she is now this absolute powerful warhorse of it. But at the same time, constantly these chats back and forth that are going on between all the characters going, is Donut okay? Do we need to look out for Donut? I totally agree.
She's still quite childlike. I love it.
And she's forced into a situation where she has to be like a sniper for a lot of this, and she seems to relish it partly, but then when she has to kind of do the finishing move with her astral paw, to like, that was such an emotionally heavy moment, because you could see how it was so hard for Donut to do that, and it was really gross for everyone. And I love that Dinman handles these huge zany moments with actual real emotional weight, because there are, whether it's NPCs or real or biologically organic, characters from outside dungeon, like they all have real lives at stake. And so,
and it feels real.
Yes. There's moments in the book where you kind of sit there and you're sitting there thinking, if we get to that scene at the end of the book, I am just reading about a cat that's somewhat anthropomorphized, who has just killed thousands of people and has been goaded into it, and basically blackmailed and gaslit into it by an artificial intelligence that is simultaneously trying to take over the galaxy and perform retribution on thousands of alien species. And you're kind of sitting there like, how did we get here? Do you know what I mean? Like, what?
It got so big.
This started off with a man in Seattle in his underwear, and now we're here.
But that, I think, is what has kept, well, not so much kept, but certainly invited it into my heart, because it's not just the dungeon. There is this sense of it being a much greater story, and the dungeon, very strangely, is the anchor. That's the bit that we kind of come back to. We sort of look out at the galaxy and go, all of these political factions, and we've got the alchemist, and we've got the apothecary, and we've got the eulogist, and we've got all of these things that we're still learning about, and all of these races and the political factions. And it's big and it's serious, and there are millions of people who don't have the right to housing, that don't have the right to food. You're like, okay, there are serious issues happening out there, but hang on, we have to kill a danger dingo. It kind of brings us back to this little intimate story again. Yeah. And that scope is amazing.
Do you know what also impressed me about this book? One criticism, I mean, I'd say that whenever I have a criticism, take it with a pinch of salt, because it's still probably my top 3 series of all time. But one criticism I've had of previous works is that the laser focus on Carl and his POV sometimes comes to the detriment of understanding this world more. And I think although book 5 is my favorite book, book 5 suffers from this the most. It'd be nice to see these other characters and what they're doing. But I think book 7 solves this issue beautifully by having these little tiny interlude POVs from the previous crawlers who've owned the cookbook. I think that's such a great way, because it's still very much Carl's story. But having what's the name of is it a Naga who gets crushed in the tower? Is it Evelyn or something like Evelyn?
I can't remember that one's name, but they're the one that went up the tower, like based on a sponsor, like giving them like this finding capability, and then it was just a sponsor kind of trolling.
Yeah, it was literally an ad, and it was horrific.
I think the book is brilliant at beginning to expand the scope of this world through these little interludes. And I think we've all read series where you get to an interlude and you're like, okay, right, time to 3 pages to go until we get back into the action. But this is almost the opposite. Every time we got to a new crawler, I was like, oh, good, it's time.
And they don't go on too long. They don't go on too long. They're also like, I think the series leveled up once we started getting the cookbook just messages from book 3 onward. Like, that's when, like, what you're saying is once we get a little bit extra beyond Carl's POV, that to me, that was the secret sauce. That was the injection of elevating the series into something more and special from what it was in books 1 to 2. And then we get the actual POVs this time, though. And Dinman delivered in making them so 3-dimensional, so real, like Milk just like rotting away in the calligraphers guild and kind of losing all kind of will to live, and then just all of a sudden getting crashed in on by Prepotente and Miriam Dam, and just like what an incredible bit of character writing to bring these characters to life in so few pages.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have one criticism of the book. Well, I have a few very, very minor.
Go for it.
I'd say I only have one criticism that I wonder if people are going to agree or disagree with me on. I'm not sure I'm happy with the ending. And what I mean by that specifically is not any particular sequence of events. I almost feel like there should have been more weight to the ending. I feel like our characters, apart from Lee Jun, got away with it all. It almost felt a little bit too triumphant for me. And I'm wondering if you would agree or disagree.
I mean, I didn't feel that way, and maybe I'm a softie, and I don't need actual character deaths. I think in a long series, like along the way, I tend to, I would have been okay even if Lee Jun had survived, and we literally the whole team got through. Yeah. I would have been just fine with that, and I've seen that in a few other places from other readers that it kind of lowered the stakes for them, but for me it didn't, and I see where you're coming from though. But this being a middle book, I think also for me it's just like, we have plenty of time towards the end of a series to raise the stakes. I love all these characters. I don't want to.
No, I would call this the beginning of the end. And remember, there's only about 2 or 3 books left, I think, planned. Yeah, and certainly this book, as you said in the beginning, was kind of marketed or has been built up as kind of maybe not the big climax, but probably the climax before the big climax.
This is the Storm of Swords. This is the
exactly.
We've finished the beginning. Yes. Now we're getting into the end game. But I mean, that's a valid point that you make, that we didn't really lose anybody that would make that feel as important as perhaps it is. Yeah. I'm going to say I didn't feel that way, but only because we had different stakes given to us in that we got that little bit more knowledge about Lucia Ma and the stakes that we've got there. Like that's a big thing. We have a huge problem on our hands now because
Katya leaving the group. Katya leaving the group for the service is almost the equivalent. Is almost the equivalent of a death in the team. Yeah,
because I feel that we're going to follow Katya. I feel that we're going to get her POV in the next books.
Oh, do you?
We get it mentioned by the ex-crawlers at the end, where they're saying we've got these tech suits that now work because the AI has this expanded control area, and we have to go and support this ex-crawler who is Katya, obviously, but she's also got the Popoff brothers up there. So there are 3 ex-crawlers up there on the surface, and we've been hearing throughout the series that there's been resistance. We know there's been pushback on the surface. We've been hearing snippets. So I just feel that we're going to get 2 war fronts in the next book. We also have that very tantalizing glimpse of Eris, the chaos god.
Yes.
Off Earth. She's left Earth. She's still within the AI's area of control, but she's in the wider galaxy, and she's the goddess of chaos. That's going to be interesting. So there's this sense of this not little, but it's a sense of scale almost, that our crawlers are just a small group that they might all survive because there's only a few of them. They've got a good handle on what they have to do. Yeah. It's just a question of can they bring it together on any given moment. But Lucia Ma's situation, we have no idea how to protect this girl and how to solve that problem. The surface, we don't know what's going on up there. We don't know what controls are in place. We don't know what this facility in Delhi encompasses. Yeah. We don't know. We don't know what it looks like on the surface anymore. So while the faction wars is done and we didn't really lose a big portion of our people, we also have Brittany being possessed by a Pito, because she's got her battle axe, and a Pito's a big mystery because a Pito has a soul gem, but she's not dead, and you can only create a soul gem if you're dead. And There's a whole mystery going on there, and I'm like, we have enough to be going forward with.
I don't know how he's going to tie it up.
Samantha, I know who you really are, says Juicebox. I'm starting to wonder, is Juicebox actually a peto? Not just it's Samantha. Is Samantha actually?
Yeah. I caught you.
Because she's tied into the scavengers
mythos.
Nomenclature. That's not the word. But the scavenger's daughter. We've had the scavenger's champion. We've had all of these named items to do with the scavenger, and she's somehow connected to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the cloak. I think the cloak was somebody. It was a Peto's champion or the oak champion, something champion, which tied it together for me. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's a big thing. The rereads have been crazy because so many things tie
and everything
in.
Audette's doing too, like in the ascendancy.
Because that's going.
Yeah,
there's stuff going on downstairs as well, upstairs, isn't there? But when are we gonna? I don't understand how he's going to wrap this up in 2 or 3 books. Let's say it's 10, not 9, and we've got 3 more books to go. But he said on record that probably book 8 is going to be shorter. So I'm thinking of all the stuff that you've just said. We've got to go down a few more levels. We're probably not going to get to 18. I mean, 17 is basically 17's been blown out of the water. It's basically a mirror in a room, isn't it? And we know that 18 is a party floor, allegedly. But we've still got there 6 or 7. He's got to kind of blow the lid off the whole thing eventually. And I think the next book is when it's going to happen.
We're going to get that. Justice Light, who was playing with traps, at the very end, he, with the Gate of the Feral Gods, has managed to get the Nothing,
yes,
and the Ethereal Realm and the Scolopendrel level 18, all in the same space.
Yeah. So
now whatever is happening there is madness.
Yeah.
But they've all been open since the 3rd floor opened. They've been making a point of that. The 3rd, 6th, the Scolopendra levels all started when level 3 opened. The crawlers might not be there, but they're open and operating.
Yes.
Whereas the other floors aren't. So whatever Odette's doing, she's been doing since she got there.
And that's on the 12th floor or the ascendancy. I imagine that's the plan for the last book, because then there's the 10th floor, which is supposed to be like a Mad Max style road race floor, and then I have no clue what 11th, and then oh really? Oh wow!
Made the big deal that nobody's ever got past floor 13.
I think we're going to skip 10. Would be my guess. I think we're going to skip 10. I think the fact that he gave away
skipping a couple.
I think we're going to have a 7th floor style breaking of the system, and we're just going to shove on a little further.
Ooh.
Yeah,
I wonder perhaps if this merging of floors and realms and planes or whatever that we had is going to be what it is. That when they get to the 12th, it's also the 18th. That's also the end of the game.
Yes.
Because of this merging of whatever it was that Justice did with that Gate of the Feral Gods. There's just going to be something there. Interestingly, because I'm like that, I looked up Scolopendra, and it's the Latin name for centipede, which of course is the shape that we get on the back of Carl's vest with the skulls going through the thing. So Scolopendra, the scavenger, it's all tied together somehow. Matt knows what he's doing. I trust him. He's absolutely earned that trust from me. So I'm very excited to where it goes, because he's put so many things in. This could go in so many different directions. Very excited.
Do you know one criticism that I saw that I would disagree with? So before the book came out, I posted, I think, on Reddit, and I said, listen, those of you who've been following the Patreon, how is book 7? Give me your thoughts before I read this thing, because I don't have an original bone in my body, and I want you to tell me what my opinion is going to be. And what a lot of people said was, listen, it is a furious, fast-paced, frenetic, energetic, exhausting book, which I would agree with all of that. But I had a lot of people also, not a lot, but I had some people say, listen, if you're looking for a character-based book, you're going to be disappointed. It's not that. It's all action. And I would totally disagree with that criticism, because I think what Dinneman does very well is that in book 5, I'll go back to book 5 because it's my favorite. Although I think book 4 is underrepresented, so I'm with you on that, Ben. But I think the thing that he does in book 5 is you have action set piece, quiet moment with the character, we get that development, and then we move on to the next set piece. And what book 7 kind of does is it kind of braids them together. And I think that's really, really at the most pointed moment when Donut has just done what she's done on that sniper rooftop, and she is exhausted. And Carl is saying to her things like, "You do not have to do this. We will find another way." And it's all a bit hilarious at the same time because she's getting a dog tattooed on her, and it's a bit silly.
Yeah.
But the character moments are driven by the plot rather than happening in the gaps between the plots. And I think that's another thing I admire with. And one thing I also, if we can move on to this maybe, is I adore how far these characters have come, and that Donut is getting increasingly vulnerable as she's getting more powerful. And at the same time, Carl has somehow become this incredibly dark human being. And there's a line that I highlighted. I never highlight my books, but there's something along the start where I think Carl says to someone, "I can't wait to meet your mother later because I'm gonna off her as well." And there's that moment at the end of book 7 where he touches, what's the name of his viceroy, his adjutant?
Oh, yeah. Princess Formidable, maybe?
No.
Yes. No, that's the other one.
Formidable's aunt.
What's her name? Give me a second.
Princess.
No, Justice.
No.
She's a justice.
Adjutant.
That's going to drive me mental. But what he does, is he
Victory?
kind of touches her arm or something to say thank you. Yeah, Victory. He touches Victory in the arm, where he brushes her to say thank you for all your help. And he's not just saying thank you. He also thinks, and we get his POV here, she is now the queen of her race. If I can execute her right now, I will. And there's a cold calculation that has kind of crept up on us from book 1. That this man, okay, he takes the ring of divine suffering, not the ring of divine suffering.
Finally. Yeah. I was so relieved when he took that off. Oh.
But at the same time, I'm like, this man has gone down such into a pit of darkness that it doesn't really matter to some extent. I think he's made that decision, but I think
I love some of the repeating lines for. Yeah. I thought that was a moment in the sand. Yeah, where he's not willing to go beyond a certain point and lose himself, and that's what I love about Carl too. Where there's this combination of he is getting darker, but you will not break me. That he is drawing lines that he will not cross, and but there's the "you will not break me" line, which I love repeated. What's the other repeated line that he uses to talk about that? We're gonna have to do terrible things.
We're going.
And then when he sees Katya having when she changes back to her normal form and she's missing all these body parts.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
We get that line also that repeats where it's like something about we're going to have changes
and
we'll lose things.
And we will lose people and it will get harder. For me, the thing with Carl is, yes, he's getting darker, but only in that he's really thinking about consequences, where it was upsetting me with the Ring of Divine Suffering, because that kind of lessens the value of the lives that he's taking, because they're just a point he could get at the moment of their death. So I was very relieved when he let that go. And he has always counted the taking of a life to be serious. Now he's starting to accept that sometimes the cost of that life has to be paid. And I like that he thinks that. I like that he acknowledges that this is a cost.
Yeah.
But to get rid of this person, to end that person's life, could be of massive benefit in the long run for himself, for people he cares about, people he loves. And he has to weigh that up every time. And I like that he has the darkness in him that allows him to see that equation.
And also contrasting with Lina, who crosses those lines and doesn't have that. Yeah. And so there's that nice contrast of her using the ring instead of Carl throwing it away, and that now has kind of screwed her over.
She's one of our dark threads going forward. Is she going to be able to get those last couple of people so that she can heal, because she's in trouble?
The consequences of what she's done has now got her in a serious sticky situation.
It really has. And I love the consequences of everything in the series.
Has Lena always been that dark, or has this been?
Yes.
Yeah, she has been.
She's been very. She's not dark necessarily. She's very practical. She's always been somebody that whatever it needs doing. There's no point moralizing over it. And she's always been dismissive of a lot of Carl's way of doing things because he's so emotional. But she also
did that. She had that moment.
The lens off the Mantor.
Yeah, she cut the Mantor up
so that
in book 3.
Fight.
But her choice of the demon, I think her choice of the demon race also was kind of Dinniman able to show us very quickly without much page time that she has this darkness and
this affinity to.
Like she gave up the idea of any human interaction or affection. She can't even touch people.
She also, during this massive battle, goes AWOL because she's going to go and desecrate her brother's body for his eye because it's better than her own. And she literally rips it out of her dead brother's head. And that disturbed me. I was reading that thinking, oh, that's cold.
She also wasn't taking into account all the people that were invading not the Desperado Club. What's the other club? The Club Benghis. Yeah. When they were invading, she was just using that as an opportunity to level up all of her dreads. And that's causing chaos inside the club as the different dreads that she's casting are having all different effects. And she's like, I gotta level them up. I'm cycling through. So she
rotates her spells based on the XP.
Yeah. She was like, this isn't something I can train. Yeah. And now I have the opportunity. I'm taking it. I'm not going to take into account what it's doing in the club where my supposed allies are. I'm not taking into account what it's doing to my allies in the club. I just need this to better my own stats. And there's that very calculating, not even selfish. It's just very cold. It's very emotionless.
And it's just flipped into these scenes. There's not even attention being called to it. So that's where Dinniman is a master, where he's giving you character insight through action scenes. And I love it all throughout the series, but the action scenes almost always give you interesting character moments and insights. Yes. And then between the action scenes, though, like you mentioned, David, that there are incredible, slower, quieter character moments throughout the series. But even in this book, we pause a bunch for those character moments, especially with the cookbook authors. But then one of the big centerpieces of the book, which is so emotional that I had trouble on reread. Like I could barely listen to it. I think I even skipped ahead a little bit because I knew what it was, and it was so emotionally heavy. And that's when we relive Katya's worst and favorite memory, and we learn that her former partner, just out of spite, this nasty guy, ruined her opportunity to adopt this
just
sick
needed to
baby
be loved for a little while.
And we see the scene where Katya is holding Annie, and that is one of the most heartbreaking moments I have ever read anywhere. And it happens in DCC. It happens in Desert Carl. And so I don't in that book. And the tenderness and sensitivity that Carl has for Katya around it was so touching. And he really understood the pain and gave Katya the space to grieve and be sad. But then for Carl to be wise enough to say, you gave her that, and you might not have been able to adopt her, but she knew. Man, I'm getting emotional just talking about this. But
I'm getting emotional hearing it. It is beautifully done. I like that, and I've actually had some pushback on this in Discord this week. I like that it's not presented as a romantic connection to Katya.
Yes, absolutely.
I like that it's just a very loving friendship, that they just care about each other. The fact that there is no spark, that there is no yearning. I love that. I really love that. That's awesome. Yeah. I was a little surprised to discover that Imani has a crush on Chris. I'm like, okay, that's the thing.
I wonder if that was just thrown in as he was writing it. I wonder if he had that in advance, or if he just thought that would be quite a fun.
I think that recontextualizes. I mean, it makes sense if they were both working at the same, retirement
she's
home.
So much younger. I always forget how young Imani is.
But that recontextualizes in book 4. In book 4, when Chris is saying when he's paralyzed inside the the body
Yeah,
that Maggie had
possessed.
taken over, and Chris is saying, "Just kill me. I'm
Imani
in
was
pain here."
so adamant.
And Imani was like,
Don't you
"Carl,
dare.
see if you can save Chris." Like
Don't kill
she was
Chris.
pushing for him. I think
She's like
he's been
21, isn't she, as well? She's
She's only
quite young.
21. She's really
Yeah.
young. And I
Yeah.
always forget, but I'm in my reread, I'm in the early books again. And so I'm very conscious of it at the moment, that she is still such a very young woman,
Yes.
that she's got, and she's always carried this weight of experience and maturity. It's really easy to forget how young she is. And I kind of get it. Chris is this just chill guy, you know? He's just like,
But there's little hints. It is amazing with the hints of character beats. Like he just hints in book 6 that Imani like couldn't deal with the boss that might have been set up for her, like in Detroit. Like there's these little hints of like major emotional backstory with Imani and her family, and like I love how subtle a lot of this is, and it's not just spelled out. There's I'm in awe of
it is beautiful
what he does for the side characters, especially. Like we spend so much time with Carl and Donut, like they get amazing development and interaction, but for the side characters, they don't get as much page time, and he brings them to life.
We haven't even mentioned Perpetente, who I'm sorry is just, I love him. I would die for Perpetente.
You know who I feel sorry for though in all of this? There's one human being on this planet I feel sorry for, and that's Taika Waititi. Because in the most recent Thor movie, he had a joke about a goat that was explosively yelling in everyone's face, and everyone made fun of his movie for that. And then we have
goats do that.
Yeah, and then when in Perpetente it screams explosively in people's faces, all our fans are like, "Yeah!" And I often wonder, is Taika Waititi a fan? Is he burning with the?
I'm going to guess he's loving. I can't imagine he's not. Hey, I've had a pet goat. Don't ever have pet goats; they're awful. They're smart and they're stubborn, and they have personality. Pony is not a made up thing.
I love
goats could talk, that's what they would be like. And the screaming out of nowhere is something that they do, and it's very disconcerting. The fact that now we have one man-sized, anthropomorphized, also doing it is even more disturbing and completely hilarious. Every time he screams in Carl's face, I have to laugh, because so often it's after a very emotionally vulnerable moment.
He tells Carl he loves him at one point, doesn't he?
That was a big surprise, and it was heartening because it was heartening to see that. Yeah,
he realizes he's lonely and he's been alone and he doesn't have anybody, because his backstory is he was a goat. He was part of a herd. He had a huge family. And over the time in the dungeon, they've been lost. He has Bianca and a couple of other goats that are being stored, but he's on his own. He's the only one that's sentient. How could he not be lonely?
Yeah.
His makeup is to be part of a greater group. So for him to kind of latch back on to Carl and Donut had me in tears. I was like, what do you mean?
There was two other moments that really made me kind of quite affected. The first one not really affected, but we're talking about our respect for Carl. Listen, I hope I'm wrong. I hope that he's not as dark as I think he's going, but I think he's going to get worse. But we can put a pin in that. There's two moments. I loved when he was beginning to take the serum, the potion, and he started to see into other people's minds, and he goes, no, this is not for us. That made me respect him. But the moment that I really deeply emotionally affected me as well is towards the end of the book, when he kind of stumbles across Milk and he just starts sobbing. And I think we kind of see Carl is such a stoic, you will not break me. Yeah, power to the man kind of a thing. To see this man just crumble at this very delicate moment of the book, I thought was quite effective.
I loved that moment. And I think it's really telling that the people that he has been the most emotional with are the people who are very maternal. We know he lost his mother at an early age. And when Miriam takes care of him at the beginning of Butcher's Masquerade, and she's sort of smoothing his brow, you feel him get really emotional. You feel him relax, and that sense of being cared for really moves him. And and when we get Milk, that sense of mothering, that it's okay. I've got you. That very maternal, caring, you can let go for a minute. I've got you. And he does. He feels safe. And I think that mothering, maternal energy is going to continue to echo through the series, because it is such a big part of who Carl is. And I think it's that's going to stop him going completely.
And And the Brotherhood of the Cookbook authors too. I think
Yes.
that's also that he is kind of like taking the lead among the current crawlers, and that's such a weight on him. But to be able to lean on others who have been there before,
Experience.
I think he just it allows him to not have to be that strong leader, that the top of the leaderboard of the crawlers, and shepherding them through, but that they're his brotherhood that have come before him, and that he can lean on himself. And so that with Milk, it's like both of those. With Milk, it's like both of those. But even just with when he sees Tippett at the beginning, that was so touching. And even just this light, Mordecai was like, wait, why are you having this affectionate moment with a Skyfell? They're usually not.
Never met this guy. What's going on?
They're usually I love Carl's building affection for the Cook Brothers just even before he met them, just through the book itself and the entries. And when he meets them in person, like the emotional weight, and with Milk especially. I'm with you on audio. Jeff Hayes, I love these moments in print, but when I re-listen to it, Jeff Hayes brings the emotion. Absolutely. Man, is he incredible he's incredible with zany voices and humor, but he does the quiet emotional moments in an incredibly touching way, an organic way. Yeah. And so that moment with Milk hit really hard for me on re-listen. Yeah. And that was like he brings the goods, Jeff Hayes. But it's the combination of the writing and the narration, because I've tried to listen to other Jeff Hayes audiobooks with other authors, and it wasn't the same at all. Like it was.
Those two are just meant for each other, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it comes back to the end as well. The end, a similar thing happens where all the crawlers are kind of surrounding them on Larakos. Is that right? And looking down at Carl, this great sense of emotional catharsis. Especially as some of them get to leave as well.
Oh, where they each leave a skill in the book. That was so touching. That was so touching. And with crawlers, a lot of whom we've never met before, but to see them be so appreciative of Carl and Donut, because we don't get their perspectives. Yeah.
That we're getting this sense of, and it's a very human thing. We're all taught this as readers, that you have to work as a team. You've got to all come together if you're going to overcome this thing. Yes. And we've learned through the books so far that previous crawls everywhere, nobody's managed to achieve that unity, and so they all get picked off individually. This is the first time that dungeon has occurred where the crawlers have all formed a unit and gone, no, we're going to look after each other. Yeah. So when we get that use of the zombie book, I can't think what it's called now.
The Book of Voodoo.
Book of Voodoo. That Carl has an edition that he can use. Donut has an edition she can use. And there's an edition that everybody has access to. Mm-hmm. And so whoever needs a spell or needs a potion or whatever it is, they're there. And as they're needed, they'll just be used up, but they're there. That everybody has access to. And that sense of community, of sharing, of we're in this together, I just thought was wonderful. And then you get added to that the AI has been trying to get Carl to do this for something like 3 floors.
Yeah.
He's been trying to, he's like, I've given you the ink, man. I've given you you've had the things. Work it out. And he's like, finally.
We haven't even touched on the AI, have we?
I love the AI.
Yes. That was my favorite scene, halfway through the book, when Growler Gary shows up in the office. I was on a plane reading it. I'll talk about that in a minute. I could not put that scene down. I was just a big smile on my face. Perfect marriage of comedy, tension, but also something new is happening. Something entirely unpredictable. And you feel that volatility in that scene. Brilliant. My favorite scene in the whole book.
Yes, because Orel's got no idea how to deal with it. And he's like, well, this is beyond my experience. I don't know how to deal with this.
Yeah.
I found it telling when he was talking to Donut about how, okay, I've got this new girlfriend. So we're talking about Agatha. Agatha has this old boyfriend who I'm guessing is the eulogist, which is the central system, who's in prison. Okay, that's a thing. And the apothecary is the old boyfriend's old girlfriend. Okay. And now I'm thinking, oh, okay, this system-wide chaos is coming back to this ancient story.
Yes.
Yeah, that's when the AI is describing this dynamic to Donut as if it was like a TV show. Yeah, that was
And I was enthralled. I was like, oh, that's fascinating. And we have these expanding spheres of influence of the AI of our system. And we finally got an answer as to what elements they're collecting and what they are. And it's literally our life essence fueling the central system, which is primal. It has something to do with the primal nature of things. All of the framework is there. It has been there from the beginning, and it's slowly getting filled in with all of these very clever narrative choices about what actually happened when these earliest races discovered the central systems being sentient and needing an AI. And you're like, okay, what happened that suddenly all of these things kicked off and we've seeded the universe? Why do some people want to close it down? Why are some people trying to give them all sentient? What is going on?
Yeah, this is like the epic fantasy space opera aspect
really
of the
is.
whole story that adds a whole extra flavor that when you first start Dungeon Crawler Carl, you're not expecting. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we barely see it. Or maybe that's a bad way of saying it, but it's always the periphery. Because again, we're staying with Carl.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you sometimes get a bit confused with some of the factions and the different parties going on? I do have to rewind quite a bit and just check who's who. I think a glossary at this point might be quite nice.
Yeah. Things
I mean,
like,
okay,
so
with
the
the dream, the reavers, like the prism, like it was confusing, honestly, but it wasn't that important to be able to differentiate them. It was like, no, we're just going to deal with one thing at a time, and eventually there's going to be fewer and fewer to deal with. And I am confused, like with the things that are going on with the different factions of the, what do they call the Agatha type people who came
the rituals.
The residuals, the different factions of the residuals, like that's confusing. And so I know that I'm patient. I'm just gonna, every book we've been dribbled out some more, hints and details. And man, I loved, maybe Derri didn't love going back to the scene
I'm just saying I didn't love it.
In the Florida rest stop, but I was like, that was built up so much in book 6, where Carl's being shepherded towards Miami, and then to go to meet was it Louis? No, not Louis. Polly. And that scene, it didn't end up having much resolution. It was a weird resolution that I wasn't expecting anything more to come out of like that. But seeing him go back to that moment, and it was like him going back to see the dog. There was much more happening in that moment and then Carl has the whole solar system in his hand, and he's thinking about it, and then turns off the ability to do the switch. Like that to me works so well. I loved how Carl was intersecting with the wider scope, and then hearing from the AI that when I think the AI was asked like, could Carl have done that? And he's like, I don't know, maybe. I think Carl did have the ability to like blow everything.
Yes, I would agree. I think it's case by case with this criticism. I think sometimes it works really effectively, again, that How I Met Your Mother style back and forth thing. I think there are other times where we're not sure if that is the resolution, and that can sometimes maybe throw the reader off. So the whole sequence with again, very minor quibble. Katya and Carl are on the table, and And She Maria, She Maria is who I was trying to get the name of. And I kind of was a bit lurched, maybe is the word, by that. And I guess that is intentional. It is a deliberate authorial decision, but it can, what's the word?
It can leave a jagged edge in your experience. And you're like, do I need to keep coming back to this?
That particular jagged edge, man, I was all about that because I thought we were going to go into the memories, which I think that had such a powerful emotional impact. I'm glad he saved that for later in the book because that was like the emotional peak of intensity for me. I'm glad he saved that for later. I thought we were going into the memories, and then all of a sudden, like, we're in the castle of one of the factions, and there's deaths, and people are trying to kill him, and She Maria's going crazy. Like, I loved that displacement, and like just like Carl waking up, and like what happened, and then we get the explanation from the adjutants, and like Mordecai's over there laughing. And I loved just like the relief of like, okay, Carl's okay, nothing bad happened. The other teams tried to get one over on them, but it didn't work. Like that worked for me so well. But then we get this moment of relief. We get this moment of relief And then there's this caterpillar character who's like in love with the guy who died, and he's bashing his head against the floor, and you hear the armies are massing, and I'm like, wait, what's going on? This is strange. This is odd. And
going crazy.
And then it launches right from like, oh, we think we're safe. It's come. We still have a lot of time before the battle starts.
No.
And then
We're
all of
in
a
the
sudden,
ramp up phase.
yeah,
launch
like-
straight into it. Yeah.
See, a couple of things here. We don't know who Shia Maria's husband was, but there's a sense that that person is now in Kahn as well.
Yes, I think
Yeah.
we've been hearing maybe some of his voice along the way.
And
Yeah.
there's also the thing with the residuals, going back to Agatha. We had a moment with Agatha at I think it was the prologue of Inevitable Ruin, where before the dungeon kicks off, she's in contact with another one of her faction who decides to take on a new personality and becomes Alejandro, who becomes then the youth person liaison, which has something to do with Lucia Ma. And it's like the connections are all the way through. They're right back at the beginning. They've been there the whole time, and we're finally getting context to tie these things together. So how much influence does this factional member of the residuals have on Lucia Ma, given that she's in Agatha's faction, and Agatha's faction appears to be the faction that wants to kill off all of everything living?
Yes. I think.
Okay.
Well, I think going back to the jagged criticism, though, Derri, I would say that, and I'd be interested to hear your perspective on this in particular. I think the people who maybe find slight, not fault, but maybe slight issue with the jagged edges and the back and forth thing, I would imagine those people are probably the same people who have an issue with the iron tangle, would be my guess, because it's that same kind of slight overwhelming confusion that kind of happens at some points in this series. And I think Dinneman will admit this himself sometimes. He referenced in the next book that, oh, yeah, no one was quite sure what happened there, but let's move on. I think I think he did it with the Iron Tangle, and he did it with the ending of book 6 with the staircases. Those are kind of the two most, but I think both of them get a bit that slight sense of confusion, which is then recovered later, and often purposeful confusion.
I do think it's purposeful. And I also think that part of it is on the reader to accept that you don't have to understand everything.
Yes.
And I don't have to understand everything about the Iron Tangle. Even though I've read it a number of times now, I still get confused with that whole flaw. It's very strange. But that doesn't inhibit in any way my enjoyment of that flaw. Brilliant. Marvelously done. The jagged edges in terms of the flashbacks scene, that writing tick, is a sense of not being certain if we've finished with that.
Yes.
And that's a different kind of story confusion, in that complicated, fine. I will just accept being confused. But if I'm not sure if I've had an entire scene, that can be like any conversation that gets cut off. You're like, was there something important that got left off?
Yes.
Have I is there a page missing from my book? There's a sense of what am I missing as opposed to what am I not understanding?
I guess the follow-up question for you would be, do you think there's any scenes that we haven't got the full resolution for yet? Is there anything that we're not aware we've been left hanging over?
I think there are.
Yeah.
Purely because there's so much happening in these books that it's really easy to forget that we haven't had resolution for everything. And I'm okay with that, where they're not so blatant. But particularly where we had the situation with Paulie in the homeless shelter, that was very jagged. There's very clearly a sense that we didn't get all of that. And then when we come back and we get more, we're like, okay, is that everything?
Yeah.
Are you going to give us more again later? And there's just the sense that there could have been more there. I don't know. It just seems, I don't know. Should I be wondering about the dog? It seemed important. I don't know. There's those kind of things that bother me, where something's been highlighted or just seemingly made a little important, and we haven't come back to it. So was it important, or did I just read too much into it? I don't know.
But you're the one
But
who's got all the theories. Yeah.
I kind of like it. Because again, it gives me that open door for theories.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Can we talk about another emotional moment that was I really appreciated, because the character of Juicebox, the idea that she's having some kind of relationship or get engaged to Louis in book 4, that is played more for something that's a little bit ridiculous, something played up for a little bit of laughs in book 4.
Yeah.
And then as we get closer, Juicebox is becoming like a more powerful, scary character. Is like Carl recognizes, like, is Louis on board with this? Like, she wants to, and Louis seems really intimidated, and Louis is like, she's going crazy in the chat. And Carl's like, you don't have to go through this, but Louis is like, no, I need to do this. It's going to help us. And the way that this actually resolves, where Juicebox kind of like understands Louis on a deeper level through kind of connecting with him and touching him, and then like Juicebox talking about why she loves Louis, like genuinely, and he's this pure heart who it's just provides something that is new for her. It's something that she hasn't had before, and that had emotional resonance and depth in a way that I wasn't even expecting that character to bring into this book. And yeah, I
agree with that.
It's that balance of power and vulnerability as well. There's another scene with Juicebox where she's Carl is, what is it? He's trying to get an action item passed through, and he can, or maybe Donut tries to fob it off on Ferdinand.
Yes.
Ferdinand's about to do it, and Juicebox just gives him a look. And
she's like,
yeah. And then Carl's like, you know what? Fair enough, because he is treating the NPCs like NPCs still, without kind of consciously doing it. Or Donut does. Maybe. It was Donut who does it.
And there's also Juice. I mean, I think Juicebox is really fascinating, because we're getting a lot of hints that she is, as you say, incredibly powerful.
Yes.
And we saw her turn into some kind of nightmare thing that really frightened everybody.
Yeah, what was that thing called?
And I don't know. It was some kind of
it's like a nightmare fairy tale that gets told around the galaxy.
It's the ultimate boogeyman. But she can't turn into something she hasn't touched. So that brings an element to what is Juicebox? How old is Juicebox? That she has this sort of mythological being as one of her aspects. How old is she? Is she one of the gods?
Is she aware of how much power she has as well? Yeah.
Yes, that's another one. But the gods are definitely important. As early as book 1, the AI is saying, next you'll be blowing up gods. I'm like, oh, okay. This is going to be a thing. The foreshadowing is there.
The gods are such an interesting aspect. He also Dittman brings an emotional weight to their appearances that can hit you unexpectedly. Like when Carl's in, when he just had succeeded in, blowing up the princess of the Nagas. I forget her name in the Desperado Club, and he's kind of like just dazed, and he's healing, and I think it was
brother comes to him.
I love that whole
sequence. Empress's brother Helic comes, and I love that these god characters, they are like, some of the NPCs have a growing awareness that their storylines that they've been fed are like fabricated for them, and that there's this like new like reality that they're becoming aware of. But the gods are mostly very unaware of that. They are so fully enmeshed in their own
this world,
created reality. It's so real to them, and it comes through. And the way that once they expel the sponsor at the end too, I forget the god's name, but she's the one that ends up giving Katya the boon once we expel Alethea. Yeah. Once we expel Quan Xin Jinx, and that was a very satisfying moment.
Oh, that was satisfying, wasn't it?
That was a moment I was not expecting either. I'm like, okay, we got it. Like, that was a little
I was expecting that to go south.
Yeah. But like the weight of these gods, the gods who are not sponsored, they are such interesting characters. They have so much like history that they bring, and the way that like I thought Helic was going to be this like throwaway character that and then he comes in and
says some things, and you're like, oh,
yes,
yeah. That was
the gods being tethered or being untethered from a sponsor, from a host. I'm just looking up the the name of the thing, the entity that
Oh yes.
embodies. It has 1,000 names: the hag, the unwashed, the stalker, the last light, the thirst, the fell, the inexorable. But we call it the beautiful place, which I think is a really interesting
That
final
is
name.
interesting.
Beautiful place. I was enthralled and not fully understanding what was going on there, but yeah, I think the idea of the almost, that's not really God, is it? That's kind of more of cosmic horror. That's just kind of
that's very primal. Again, with this language of before times and it's that mythological sense of end. Whatever it is she's now embodying is the end of whatever. But the thing with the gods, again, and Mordecai mentions it when Carl asks about the demons at the end of I, the Bedlam Bride, is that these are storylines from when the dungeon was created.
Yeah.
We don't know when the dungeon was created or why it was created, but it has something to do with the Scolopendra levels.
Yes.
And the dungeon, not the dungeon, the nothing and the celestial planes have been up and running since the birth of the dungeon, and they keep going. They have a continuous storyline through every single crawl. So they've been going for, I'm guessing, millennium.
Yeah.
Because that's how old the dungeon is. So now that we've got the nothing and the celestial plane and floor 18, this Scolopendra level all muddled together, thanks Justice Light, there's going to be things that nobody knows the backstory of, because crawlers never got to those levels. So there's been no audience to know what the storylines are. And now we're getting them all muddled together. We learned in this one that Samantha has something to do with the death of Empress's son.
Ortega? Or is it someone else? No.
Starts with a G. But
Garen.
Yes. But we learned that Samantha was there.
Yeah.
Either at the planning or at the actual assassination, murder, whatever it was. So she was a banished goddess, demon thing.
And I love how Samantha's also getting more awareness. She's becoming more aware of everything.
And she's very confused.
That's interesting. And I love that, like, Dinniman gets this. I just love the pacing of this book, because we, think we can calm down, and then all of a sudden it gets tense again. We think we have total resolution. They've won. And then Samantha mentions something about, Garen's death. And Carl's like, what? God damn it, Samantha. Like, you did not just say that. And then Empress appears, and there's all of a sudden like a timer to what's happening.
The world starts heating up. Yeah.
Yeah, because we're going to let this volcano go.
Like, I love that we thought we could relax, and now all of a sudden things are still tense, and they come up with their plan to just barely save Katya and banish kill.
They were able to get the NPCs off the floor,
so
that they didn't all have to die, and that all feeds into, again, this sense of history to events, that this is all connected somehow. I've just finished the Doomsday scenario, and the crawler, I can't think of their name now, who was killed at the end of that, who was a famous crawler.
Remix.
He keeps talking. Remix. 3 times he says in this, the orc killed me before I could complete this last time.
Yes.
So I'm like, who is the orc? Was the orc one of the dungeon cookbook, one of the anarchist cookbook authors? Who is the orc? Has it got something to do with the orcish supremacy? I don't know. And all of it feeds into itself, and all is relative. The cookbook itself, you have to consider that the very first author of this that we know of is Porthos, and he did the second edition. The first edition was created by an AI.
Yes.
What AI? Why? The AI that we've currently got, we know is a used AI. So it has previously run a crawl. Whose crawl? Is that going to come back? What crawl was it? What was the outcome? And how has it impacted this AI that it's fighting so hard to gain this freedom for itself?
Yeah.
I love the fact that there are all of these very deep questions that are going on that you could happily ignore. You don't have to be paying attention to them. They aren't going to be as satisfying to some readers as others, but it's those things that raise this for me into something that I will love for many years.
And just if you just track how you could just track the AI's personality and the communication from the AI over the books. That would be an interesting study, because in this book, the AI is starting to go for these extended descriptions of things that it seems like the AI is kind of getting out some venting and frustrations and making
I love those
very like thinly veiled like political and social points through their descriptions. Those are a gold mine of like thematic depth. The AI's descriptions of everything. And on top of that, the AI delivers an incredible humor. Like, I love the humor in this too. Like Jamal, who just wants to hop. Jamal just wants to hop.
So funny.
Like, where does Dinnerman come up with that? I love it, because I would never come up with something like that in a million years. The shark who just wants to hop.
Keep it from being tragic, because it could very easily become very dark, very tragic, and very depressing to read. These guys have got a lot on their plates.
Yes.
But having a shark that wants to hop is funny. So you get those moments of levity. You get ponies
happen in the same scene as well. Both things happen in the same scene. It's not that, you have the Jamal bit and then you have something tragic happening on, a couple of chapters later. Both are embedded on the same page sometimes.
Yeah, and it's wonderful. We get the absolute tragedy of what happened to Louis in this book, where he's had half his innards ripped out and replaced with a sentient being from an alien enemy race. And you're like, how are they going to fix this?
Yeah.
Samantha actually does something very self-sacrificial. This body that she's been promised, she's like, no, give it to Louis. Give it to Louis.
Yes.
So, okay, now we fix that, and he's got to have the rebreather that Carl ever so conveniently took from, the curtine earlier in the story. And so now Louis alive, and he doesn't have this alien entity in him. But the process of rescuing him has broken Juicebox's heart, has needed this sacrifice from Samantha, has included this really emotionally dark set of events.
Plus the trademark humor and zaniness, though, where like Samantha's like touching his gills and he's like, don't do that, that feels strange. Like,
it's
like the mixture,
like, I just went to,
the mixture where it's the zaniness, it works so well. It never like becomes absurdist or surreal. Like it's all feels organic, and Dinnerman is so clever.
Very human.
He's just so clever too. I just like the humor in this works better for me than humor in any other thing I've ever read. Like I just connect. Just connect to this brand of humor for whatever reason. Like, little Gunter. That was another moment.
I was about to say,
This is an incredibly funny moment where we see little Gunter. Like we got introduced to what this power was going to be, and then when we see it, it was so ridiculous. But it then moves into this horrifying scene where Carl like blew himself up, and he's like, like he's basically liquefied himself,
mush,
and he's experiencing more pain than he's ever felt in his life. Like it goes from like so like just ridiculous humor that still feels like hard hitting in some way, that still feels organic, and to those really gritty moments. Like there's a mixture here that is so unique.
And in both of those scenes we just identified, there's other funny strains running through it. So with the Louis stuff, when he's kind of getting his robot innards fixed, Donut is trash talking the antagonist the whole time.
Oh, and it's beautiful. It is so beautiful.
One of my funniest page of the whole book. I love that. And then at the same time with Run Little Gunter Run, just before that, the AI is like, I wonder who's going to die this time. Let's make this guy die, because we've not seen him.
Yes. Also,
oh my God, that's one of my favorite jokes. It's one of my favorite jokes in the series. Wait, Zhang, he's like, Zhang, you've been like,
you're obviously the extra. You could be the target.
I love that.
We're going to have a live betting event.
No, I love that metatextual humor never gets too much. It's sprinkled in so sparingly. There's another one at the start when Rend becomes Sir Rendlegore, and Donut says something on the lines of,
I
"Oh,
love
it's always late. It's always late in the game that we have to add in a new character who should, who's clearly just a weak insert."
And it's Scrappy Doo all over again.
Yeah. And it's very, very carefully done, because whenever I see that kind of humor, I think, right, the author's running out of steam. Self-awareness only gets you so far. There's a really, who's the guy who wrote Catch-22? Joseph Heller. The last book Joseph Heller ever wrote was a novel called A Portrait of the Writer or the Author as an Old Man. And this book is all about an old man trying to write his final novel and failing miserably at it. And it's so on the nose. And ever since I read that book, I was like, right, I don't think this kind of meta-textual, self-deprecating humor is for me. But Dinniman does it. And every time he does it just so carefully that it makes me laugh.
Yeah.
Oh, the Zhang joke.
It's self-aware without being mocking.
Yes.
Yeah.
In that everybody reading this is now going, oh, okay, we've got a new pet this late in the series. Okay, we've seen this before. So we're going to acknowledge that this is a thing that has been done before. Yeah. And we're going to mock it. And by doing that, we've smoothed out the entry of this character. And I think they did it really well, because it had been Sir Rendlegore's pet beforehand. And we had that connection to Sir Rendlegore. I like that we've brought that connection into this character in the naming. And it was made a big deal of in the naming scene, which, again, one of our moments of insane hilarity and nonsense with Carl's hair being grown back. Which I'm sorry, that's just one of those moments of complete lunacy that is a joy to read. And yet we have this quite meaningful conversation with Donut about what you call people has an impact in how they behave. And I was like, that's actually really meaningful, Donut. She can be very deep.
Who's your favorite character? After you've done, I'm curious to hear that.
Oh, I'd have to think about that, because I just love them all.
Well, Derri's thing, I just want to mention about the Zhang joke. I mean, out of all of the kind of named side characters who are part of like the inner circle of this team of crawlers, Zhang probably is the one that was most just the name that we've seen, where the character didn't get really developed in a meaningful way. And so like Dinniman recognizing that and doing that metatextual humor there, it worked so well for me. Like that joke landed just unbelievably well for me. I loved it both times. And then seeing Zhang's like resenting that and the joy of him surviving, against the odds, and then and Zhang getting rewarded extra for that, and like the Dinniman recognizing that he this is like a typical like tertiary side character that has just been a kind of a name and just been like tagging along, and then the providing a little extra development for him, and now Zhang is more of a character that I can recognize.
It feels like it feels for me like Matt's telling us I'm a fan too, and there's a comfort to that as a reader that he recognizes he's writing tropes. He recognizes that these are beats that just happen in stories, and he's going to acknowledge them, but he's not going to get rid of them. It's like, no, I still need this character, so I'm going to acknowledge that it fits this trope, but I still need them. So come with me. I think he gets
away with it as well, because it comes from the perspective of the AI, who is essentially the dungeon master and the narrator. And so, and also Donut sometimes, who is so drenched in media, that it comes from the character
very socially savvy in terms of plotting, which again, brilliant narrative choice, because Donut can then say things that you wouldn't normally be able to in a story. There's a what's the word I'm looking for? Matt Dinniman has created some very intentionally created characters where he can use them for specific things, and Donut is our self-aware storyline person. He's created a character who understands how storylines have to work to get an audience, so he's able to use Donut to steer his characters, because she knows how the story has to go. So she tells them, no, from here we need to now do this, because that's how the story has to go for us to get followers. that would be difficult to achieve if you hadn't established Donut as this massive TV watching fan of successful stories. And to be able to bring that in with the AI as well, who has, absorbed all of Earth's culture and has learned all there is to know.
Mm-hmm.
Between the two of them, you get the micro and macro view of the dungeon.
Yes.
And so depending on what Matt needs in the moment, he can give you humor from one or both of them.
Yes.
It's so cleverly done. And I respect it as a reader. I have no claim to ever be a writer. I'm one of the few booktubers that doesn't claim to want to write.
Me too.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm an audience member.
Yeah.
I will read. Just
Yes.
make the amazing things. I will read them.
Yes.
As a reader, I can see the talent that it takes to create those characters, because it gives that author the freedom to do what they want to do without it feeling heavy-handed, because it often does. And
Abed from Community feels like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a little
Too
too
much.
on the nose. It's a little too directed. And Donut and the AI between them just cover it beautifully. Absolutely beautifully.
I often felt like it was a little too on the nose with, even though it was a show I loved, The Office. I thought it wasn't always working with Michael Scott or some of the side characters where it would lean too far into caricature or just like a certain shtick that it occasionally it was working for me great, and then other times I was just kind of being taken out of it.
Over it.
Yeah.
Those two jokes in this book, I think there was only 2 or 3, and they land so beautifully because Dinniman's aware that you should use it sparingly. The reason that I want to ask for your favorite character, I know, Ben, I know your time is short, but I want to hear your answer on this because I was talking to my sister about this, and I got my sister and my brother both into Dungeon Crawler Carl. It's the only series where all 3 of us have been able to read it, which says something in and of itself. But I was talking to my sister about Dungeon Crawler Carl, and she's like, "Who's your favorite character?" And I'm like, "Well, of course it's Donut. Like, Donut's the only answer to this because Donut is the best character." And then my sister goes, "What are you talking about? Samantha is the best character in Dungeon Crawler Carl." And it was such a blindingly stark realization to me that my favorite character is not necessarily everyone's favorite character, because I just assumed that everyone would have Donut as their favorite character.
I mean, I tend to be boring on the character front because I get ultra attached to the primary POV, the primary protagonist, the center around which everything is kind of revolving. So I mean, Carl's my favorite. I really live inside POV characters, bodies and minds, and see things through their eyes, especially if it's a POV character. And so I just feel so close to Carl, and it's not even that, I can personally identify with him in a lot of ways. I'm so different from Carl, but I can sink into his being and feel like I understand him so well, and I respect his courage and bravery and resourcefulness and ability to make connections and to grow. And so, I mean, for a lot of boring reasons, I think Carl is my favorite.
I don't think those are boring reasons.
No. He's also younger than we think, isn't he? I always, when you see fan casting, people see him as like some kind of like late 30s, early 40s dude, but he's supposed to be in his mid 20s, I believe. Yeah.
He's flailing too, because he's a sensitive kind of romantic, but he got pushed around by his ex B and got cheated on, and he had a bad luck with who his father was, and so he had this awful aspects of his childhood, and so I really just have grown attached to this character, someone who has had some bad breaks, but is doing his best to move beyond them and to not let that define him, and so I often grow attached to the main character of any big series, whether it's like
Carl
Adrian and Suneater or Harry in the Dresden Files. Like, side characters add great flavor, but if I love a series, it's likely that I am all in on that main POV character.
Yes, especially first person narration. I think Dresden and Dungeon Crawler Carl are like that. They're very
similar. They are very similar for me in terms of feel. What I was going to say with Carl is, for me, I love the fact that he is determined who he is. He was so impacted by his father. He was so impacted by what he saw growing up that he chose what sort of person he wanted to be. And he's very self-deterministic in that way. And I really respect that and admire that, because it means he has to recognize the parts of himself he doesn't like and go, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to lean into that. I'm not going to let that determine who I am. And there's a strength to that I really admire. So I do love Carl. I tend not to have favorites. I think because of the nature of the way I read. In rereading so much, I learn as much as is possible about all of the characters eventually. And I can always find enough to love about them when they've been well written. And obviously for me, that's Robin Hobb. There isn't a person in that actually, that's a lie. There is a person in that series I hate, but because they're so well written. But I can acknowledge how well written that person is.
Yes.
This series is very similar in that I love Carl. I think he's marvelous. I adore Donut. I'm a cat person. I've always had cats. So of course I'm going to adore Donut. That's a duh. And Katia, obviously I admire Katia tremendously. Mordecai, amazing. I personally, if I had to choose who I wanted to hang out with, which isn't necessarily the same as a favorite character, but I would want to be friends with Ellie. I think that she is absolutely brilliant. I adore her. There's a sense to Ellie that she's lived a very rich life and she's lived it to the fullest, and she has no filter and she does not care what other people think. And I admire that so much.
When do they transform? The start of the second book, they become...
the second book, when they get to the third floor. Yeah.
That was a great transformation. I think that was very skillful.
It was.
Yeah.
And we built that connection because obviously Ellie was the person that Carl had rescued at the second floor to get them to the third floor. And the confusion in her when she was an elderly lady, she was 99 years old, this lady, the confusion, she would confuse Carl with her gone husband, Barry. I love that I know his name. She's so clear in my head. I can hear her talking about her Barry.
Yeah.
And
my Barry, yeah.
Yeah. And yet she's relating some quite raunchy things from her youth with Barry. And she forms that connection very early with Carl, that when they re-meet, now that she's this fairy, that sense of rich life is still there. And now she is cognizant. Now she has her memories. Now she's able to be herself. And I think she's marvelous.
Yeah. So one of the criticisms I've seen people say of this book is, there's so much going on. There's a lot of new political factions and things within this faction wars that we maybe lose time with a lot of the main cast that we've been spending more time with in previous books, which is true that we don't spend as much page time with certain of the cast that we know, like Ellie, but I don't mind it. Like Ellie has already been formed so vividly. I could go back and reread, every time she's been there with Carl in previous books.
Yeah.
But in this book, she's doing an essential function. She's out there scouting. We hear little bits from her in the chat. Like, just knowing that Ellie's out there doing her part for the team, it's comforting to me. I don't need to be seeing every side character on the page. Like the core cast, I don't need them to be
we know them
on
now.
the page together the same way in every book. Like, it's okay that in some books we maybe spend less time with some characters. And this is like a subjective thing. And like, I know people like read through the Wheel of Time and, they hate, if their favorite character is Perrin or Matt, that like certain books, they're like barely in it. But for me, that stuff doesn't bother me because through a long series, it's not about necessarily.
Sometimes you don't need them.
Yeah. It's not about seeing everyone all the time.
Yes.
It's a large cast, a lot going on. I love that it could have a different feel, but so that is not a criticism.
The Katia stuff would have been nearly as good if
I live with my best friend. Yeah. Okay. I have been best friends with this woman for over 40 years. And we should not live together. You can get fed up with people that you love. Okay. This is why I'm moving. But this is a sense that often weighs down a series over time where, you could love this character, but you just don't need to be hanging out with them that much. Yes. Where You don't need to hear their every thought. You don't need to be hearing about their every small adventure. You don't have to know when they went to the shop. You don't have to know when they went and got their license. It doesn't matter. That's just part of everyday life. You know who they are. You know what you love about them. When it's important, now we're going to hang out. Now we're going to spend time because something is happening that's going to move this story forward. There's going to be something changed. There's going to be something important that you need to be there for. Yes. And I very much feel in this series, we got to know Carl, we got to know Donut, we got to know Mordecai, and we slowly added characters. We got to know Katya. We know them now. We know what they're capable of. So until we get to a big climatic moment, we can assume they're doing the things that we know they're doing. Yes. So why don't we use that time to spend some time with Louis? Why don't we use that time to spend some time with Perpetente? Because we've got that time now. We don't have to spend all of it with Carl, with Donut, because we're still getting them. We're getting them in these powerful emotional moments and these powerful story beat, dramatic, climactic moments of power and intensity. We don't necessarily need to have them all the time.
The other reference I was making in my head as I was reading the book, and just as we're having this conversation now, is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I know that thing has a lot of issues, but I really love the final two Avengers movies. And the reason I think Avengers Endgame works very well, although people love to hate on Marvel these days, is because it strips that core cast way back. You do not have 35 superheroes in that movie. You have about 7, 6, really the 3 from the beginning. And directors take those characters and make the focus on them, and it's only in the final maybe 30, 45 minutes.
And that big climactic kind of,
You cannot, I mean, this is the issue with Wind and Truth, is that there's so many characters all the way down, and the whole plot just becomes glacial like that. And I would not want to have so many characters. I'm fine with Ellie for a book being a radio communications person. I think that needs to happen if you want some kind of level of progression.
Yeah.
Imani, and the characters still were there. He didn't forget about any. Imani was there on the battlefield, like flying around doing her healing thing. Like the little bits we get with the side characters, like they hit, and the characters are all fulfilling their role. And we're with Carl's POV, so we can't be seeing everyone, especially with this big, wide-ranging faction wars plot where there's a lot of moving parts. We have to be doing, working on a lot of different plans and things all at once. Like I love that feel for it, where like Louis is flying around his I
love that he's our pilot,
and
I love it.
And Ellie is like doing scouting missions, and Brittany is hanging out with the liaison with NPCs, and like over the I love that he's juggling all these different balls and plates in the air, and it was exciting and tense, and the kind of roller coaster ride that I was honestly hoping for from this book. So
roller coaster is the word, isn't it?
Yeah.
The one thing that I wanted to talk about that we wouldn't have had time for so far is the concept of the inevitable ruin. I love that being the central kind of thematic piece of this book. The idea that, and what I'm trying to work out, because I think it's both at different points in the book. Sometimes it's the point at which you are doomed. And at some other points, it seems to be the realization that you have crossed the point of no return. It seems to be both at the same time. But I love this idea of when you think back, that was the moment where it all went south. And you don't even know what that moment is until several hours, weeks, months later. I love that as an idea. I don't know if Dinneman came up with that or if that's something that's already kind of been floating about, but it really did make me think.
It is a sentiment that pre-existed. I can't think to myself if I've heard it expressed in so many words, but it's certainly a thing. For me, it's the point at which there's nothing you can do about it. It's everything's in motion, everything's kicked off. You can no longer change the outcome. It is out of your hands. There's nothing you can do about it.
Who says it? Who says it first?
The dungeon author, Evelyn. I think it's Evelyn. The tower.
Yeah.
The tower.
Oh, yes. So it was. It is. Oh, so it was a concept from her culture. Yeah. She was a mantis. She was one of the a mantid, I think. Yeah.
And so it's definitely that sort of sense that can't do anything about it now.
And how does that change your philosophy? And then is it actually possible? Because this is what Carl kind of realized. He kind of goes, F the inevitable ruin. I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing anyway.
Yeah.
Where he takes something that is bleak and then turns it into a point of hope.
But there are still actions he can take. So he's refusing to just take his hands away and go, oh, well, whatever happens now. He's gone, no, I still have an element of control here. I can still direct the course of events. So I'm going to, for as long as I can make anything happen, I'm going to, because it could help me. And there's very few moments when there's nothing he can do. And you very much get that sense of hopelessness from him when they occur, of, I can't change this. This is happening. And how are we going to deal with this? But he is very forward thinking, in that he is then thinking of the next step. If this occurs, it's not over.
But the fact that that is the like repeated kind of internal arc he's going on, and that he's having success doing this, it gives the overarching tone of the series one of more of optimism and hope, and it keeps it from being so bleak, because it is a very gritty survival stakes thing going on, but it does not feel at all nihilistic or deterministic. I've been hearing people reading like R. Scott Baker's series recently, and like
I'm reading R. Scott Baker right now. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Apparently, it's very good. Very good.
I'm only on book 2, but yeah.
But I it seems to be taking a different kind of bent towards people's power to do something about the inevitable ruin or the bleakness and the random chaos of everything. And personally, I would love to. I want to read deep things like R. Scott Baker's series, but I dread it too, because I know it's going to offer a more bleak and depressing worldview than what Dinneman's offering us, where it's more this tone of personal empowerment, agency, and found family that together we're stronger.
But and I don't know if you guys have more knowledge on this than I do, I have heard that all of Matt Dinneman's previous works end less than positively. I've heard that about Kaiju Battlefield Surgeon, and I've heard that about Dominion of Blades, his 2 previous works that I'm aware of. Especially Kaiju, I've heard that, this isn't really a spoiler, whenever anyone references Kaiju, they reference that it's bleak.
I've read it. It has darker, like more grimdark, like body horror moments, torture scenes. Like it's harder to read some of the scenes in there, and it's not cut as much with humor in that book. But I think the overarching like worldview and feel is still like is recognizably Dinneman's from DCC.
So do we have hope that the ending isn't going to be horrific and heartbreaking? Because that's what I'm nervous about.
Yeah, there's hope. There's hope. So like I came to this because I wanted to try out more Dinneman, and it feels like a proto Dungeon Crawler Carl. Like it feels like that was his practice run at this, and maybe Dominion of Blades is also. If I try that, I'll feel the same way about that. But there's a lot of almost similar like character beats, plot beats, the design of everything. Like there's a proto Donut. The main character is a proto Carl, but it's not as fully formed. And him trying to cover this epic, grand plot in one book, I feel like just didn't work as well because it's
being able to.
Take
his time.
Like being able to breathe and like gradually expand it as he does in DCC is I think part of the magic of why it works so well versus trying to pack everything in to just one book. It just did not have the same narrative propulsion and feel to it and stakes. And so while there's hope in there, I don't know that it will overall feel the way that DCC does while reading.
Okay. The only thing I know about Kaiju is that the beginning lines, the dedication just says, "Dear Mom, don't read this," which is very interesting.
There's some brutal and nasty stuff in there, but I think there's a lot of the same attitude. But even more so in that book.
But I mentioned this earlier. There are people, and I know them. Andrew Wizardly reads. He and I often disagree on book series, particularly later books. He has a problem with how wide the story has become and prefers the earlier books where it's more intimate.
I saw that, yeah.
And I come at it very differently. I like the broadness of the story. I love that it's now this massive expanse of world, universe. And I almost feel like that Matt's created this world backward. He knows the scope and he knows that's where he's going. He's had to start intimately, because you can't just dump people in the middle of a whole universe spanning story. You've got to start them somewhere. You've got to have an anchor to bring people back to remind them that, no, it's okay. It's a massive story. I know it's a big story, but there is still people at the center of it. And that's how I see it. It's that Carl and Donut are his anchor for telling this very big story. And it has always intended to be this very big story. He didn't start with just Carl and Donut and go, what's going to happen now? It's very clear he had a broad story in mind, purely down to the amount of foreshadowing for things that have happened and I'm sure are still to come in those early books. He knew where he was going.
My fear is a fan theory that I read online. I think this is probably the most popular prediction of the ending. Maybe you already know what I'm talking about. That Dinniman is going to end it, and I hope he doesn't do this, with Donut reverting back to standard cat. That would break my heart. More than a character death, and that would break my heart. They somehow lose.
We have a moment like this already in this novel of Ruin, where Tipid kind of loses his kind of like neuro upgrades with the EMP pulse, and that's really sad because he was a very lively character and super sharp and competent, and then we see he's just like a shell of him, the former self.
He's also damaged at that point.
Yeah. And I would be surprised if
be reverted. I don't know that she would necessarily be damaged. And I don't know necessarily that it would be a bad thing, and that the right author can take you on a journey that will allow that. And that perhaps we get to a point where Donut is so hurt and so not dark, depressed, so withdrawn within herself with everything that she's had to do, that there could well be an outcome where, do you know what? We can take that away from you. We can take that burden. We can take that heartbreak away and let you be a cat again, watching TV.
Yeah. I want Donut to be a successful. I want Donut to be a successful TV writer with Zev.
I'd like that to be an outcome
where they
for
get
her.
To improve the entertainment in the galaxy, so that we
don't need the dungeon.
So that we don't need the dungeon anymore.
Yeah. It all comes down to the writing. You know, I'm happy to go where Matt.
I know you're saying this could be a bittersweet ending, and I do see cerebrally what you're saying, but it's still, even just hearing you talk about it breaks my heart. That moment of pressing that button and the personality.
I still think if that happened, I would imagine. I would imagine though, if that does happen, that if Donut reverts back and Donut's still there with Carl, that there would still be like an echo of their growing bond, or like of the essence of the bond might still actually be the same, even if Donut doesn't have the same sapience. But that would be very sad. That would be very sad.
It would be very sad.
I trust him to end it effectively, but I don't know if I trust him to end it happily.
I'm not going to finish that sentence.
Okay.
I actually personally I don't like to speculate too much about endings. I don't even like to see theories. I like to not be spoiled on anything, and that includes even not knowing theories, because if it's a good theory, so like there was this very widely discussed theory about something in Wind and Truth that got confirmed, and like the whole time I might have been surprised by it if I never heard the theory. Like I might not have caught it myself. I might have caught it on my own, maybe not. I might have been surprised. Like I just want to be surprised. I don't even need to theorize about where it's going or the end. Like with an author that I connect to with their writing voice so much, like they could write anything, like anything could happen. I want to be along for the journey.
They have my trust. It's like, I'm here. Take me where we're going to go. I believe you.
Just coming off that point, like often the books that I am waiting for the author to release are not necessarily not my favorites, but I don't like being on that waiting train. So we'll reference Jim Butcher one more time. Love Jim Butcher stuff.
It's difficult waiting.
I have never been more happy.
Expectation forms something.
Yes, but I've never been more happy to be part of a community that is waiting and hasn't yet finished this thing that we're all on together. And the fact that the fan base has exploded over the last 2 years, it really feels like we're kind of all. I think there's going to be like 18th floor parties and stuff when that final book.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
I was at Dragonsteel for this past year, a few months ago, for the Sanderson convention, and Dinniman was there, and I brought my book here to get signed, and there was when I went, it was pretty early in the day. After he started signing, there was this giant line at the Sanderson convention to get his book signed. Like people
Awesome.
bringing these books,
Yes.
knowing that he was there, and like it was just everyone was
I love
there
that.
like for Sanderson, but tons of DCC fans that were there and just like chatting about the series with them in the line was the first time I actually got to talk about the series with anyone. And
Yes.
like it was wonderful. Like and I've heard like he just has been selling out, wherever he's going, the conventions, signings, like it's like he went from being a pretty obscure author to just
Lit
exploding
RPG,
in
Yeah.
and
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 now
it's great to see. It's wonderful to see like just something that I have no reservations about it all to explode in popularity and when you
I
see
would
people
recommend this to pretty much anybody.
yeah
It is so good because
Do
you
you
can read
want-
it on the surface and have it be light, or you can do what I do and go, oh my God, it's all about the gods and it's about this and it's about it. Take from it what you will. You're going to enjoy it.
I've seen some people asking or kind of mentioning that once the main series is over, they'd love to see a spin-off novel. And I am vehemently against that. I feel like I think it's a really difficult thing to write a sequel to a Death Game story. So I think when Dinnerman is done, my hope is that he doesn't do stories from the dungeon. I hope he finishes and he goes on to a new project because he's demonstrated that he can. And I think the worst thing he could do, and maybe I'll eat my words a few years down the line, but I think the worst thing he could do is continue to pad out this narrative, because the narrative is an extension of what his ability is, and his ability is to go and do other things as well and enjoy that success.
The cookbook gives him a nice avenue to expand the universe, where it's not so much a sequel, where it would be prequels, where we've been introduced to these characters. We know who they are.
Mm-hmm.
We could get
this is what Suzanne Collins is doing with the Hunger Games. Like she's doing, she did like the first or a very early version of the games, and now she's releasing a prequel this year for like Hamish's games.
Yeah.
And
but there's not a
lot. I gotta say, like, I'm interested.
I'm more
like
Hamish's than I was about Snow's.
I'm interested.
I'll probably
if I love a world so much, where in like the type of plotting that didn't make, like if he wanted to take us back to a previous version of the dungeon, like the flashbacks we get from like Mordecai's like are insane. Like the things that he comes up with, like I could imagine it feeling new enough for me, even if I know the ultimate stakes aren't there because we know how things end. Like I wouldn't mind, because I enjoy it just like Derri enjoys rereading. Like it's so hard for me to start new series. I'm trying to do it right now, and there's so much new world building for a secondary world,
really
and like sinking back into a writer's world that they've already created and I've spent a lot of time in is so comforting almost. Like I don't have to spend the mental energy to just wrap my head around the basics of the world building. And so like I personally, I don't know, I wouldn't mind, although if we end up reading it and he did a prequel or some sequel, and I could change my mind if it feels like it lessens like the other books.
I love it enough, I will read it.
Yes, that's true. I'm not going to not read it.
I mean, as an insane Robin Hobb fan, that Ben, you were there. She has said that she's writing again in the world. The Realm of the Elderlings is complete. It has come to an end.
Yes.
Does that mean I don't want to read more?
Yes.
No. The moment a new book comes out by Robin Hobb in that world, I am reading it.
Yes.
The second it's available.
And that's like me with Malazan, day one. Yeah.
Yeah. Is it going to change how I feel about the main story? Not one whit. It doesn't matter. But more is always
where I would disagree. Because I think, especially with death games, I know we're kind of spinning off now. I think we have to be really careful with death games, because death games as a subgenre, would you call them subgenre, I guess? I think it's very hard to write a sequel to, because either you have to do the same plot all over again, or you have to
make completely different.
Or take almost outside of the death game. So like Squid Game Season 2, I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I would say Squid Game Season 2 is an example. I mean, it's really the first half of a season. I mean, I think they've really been idiotic with how they did that. But I have real issues with Squid Game season 2 because the show can't work out if it wants to retread that old ground or just do something entirely new. And I don't know if it's even possible to find a balance with a sequel to a death game. And prequels would be a different story, I guess. But you either have to do the same thing again, or you have to take it out of the game itself. And people aren't watching. People aren't watching the Hunger Games for the assault on Panem at the end, or the Capitol, and no one's watching. No one's watching the Hunger Games for that. They want to see the televised car crash. They want to see the blood and the guts and the gore. And I don't know if we quite decided culturally how to thread that needle, because I can only count on maybe a couple of fingers the number of Death Game sequels that are in any way even worth existing.
It's the nature of the narrative. It's not a story. Yes. There is no end. There has to be a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yes.
When you've reached the end, you either have to have a complete new story.
Yes. That
you know where you're going, you know what you're doing, and you can get there, or you leave it alone.
Yes. Yes, you're saying, exactly.
That's the way stories work. The nature of prequels is that you do know how they're going to end, so there is a story. You could create your beginning and your middle. You've already told yourself the end. So, okay, there's a story. Is it a story everybody's going to love? You don't know until you release it.
Like we could get a prequel of Porthos. Like he's been a very mysterious figure of running the waste management or
because he's had to create the infrastructure for the rest of the brawlers.
Like if Dinniman doesn't give us much more for a character like this, like a prequel could be really profitable for big fans to see how did he get to this point? Like that could be interesting.
And
I agree with you on the sequels being much harder for something like this.
But you look at Lord of the Rings, people love Lord of the Rings. And then there's the Silmarillion. So you could love Lord of the Rings and never read the Silmarillion.
Yes.
Same could be true for prequels of Dungeon Crawler Carl. You could love Dungeon Crawler Carl and never read the prequels. Or you could be a complete geek and want to know everything about everyone.
Like go back to how the inner system was formed, or like the first dungeon.
But there's also a concern, I think, when the sequel retrospectively damages your understanding of the original series. Hyperion, I love Hyperion to pieces. It does this a little bit. Star Wars is kind of famous for doing this. There's another one that I don't know if you guys have read.
The example is Harry Potter and the Cursed Child.
Yes, Cursed Child.
That is the absolute best/worst example of it, and
I would also say that
undermines the story.
Remembrance of Earth's Past. This is another really horrible example. I've not actually read it, but I read the Wikipedia synopsis because I was warned not to read it. And even just reading the Wikipedia synopsis, well, here's what happens: the fourth book in the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy is
I have not read it. I have not read it. Yeah,
it's written by an author that was it's fan fiction that was then that my understanding is that Cixin Liu had to give the green light to become canonical part of his story. Yes. And so you have this fourth book that sells quite well, Redemption of Time, by an author called Bao Shu. I think that's a pen name. And when you read, if you ever read Remembrance of Earth's Past, I don't know if we have, so I won't go into it. But then apparently you just read the synopsis for that fourth book, and you're like, how on earth did this? Because I'm not touching it with a barge pole because I know that it will retrospectively go back and it will taint my original perception of that series. Which I don't think Dinniman will do.
No,
but that is.
I just know that when Cursed Child came out, I was like, oh yay, more in the Harry Potter world.
Yeah.
And I read it and I went, that does not exist.
Yes. Yeah.
No. And people were saying,
I felt the same way.
Should I read it? And I went, no, do not.
Yeah, exactly.
I felt the same way. Yeah.
And the lovely thing with, particularly in our corner of the internet, is that we are readers. We do understand that that's a thing. So if somebody says to us, don't read that fourth book. Read the Wikipedia. You don't read it. We're going to believe them.
Yes.
It's very rare that somebody's going to be masochistic enough to go, I will make up my own mind and read it for themselves.
Yes.
Because we do tend to be very forgiving in that, well, you might like it. But every now and then when someone just comes out and goes, no, don't do it.
Yeah.
That's worth avoiding. But
I have heard some people say that about the Rainwild Chronicles.
They're wrong.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
I'd agree. Yeah.
Because I'm on Fool's Fate right now, and next is Rainwild, and everyone tells me
do give yourself a break though.
Okay.
We will arrange a talk shortly.
Please, I'd love that.
There's a bunch of us. There's a bunch of us that really liked Rainwild, or at least some of the books, and Yeah, I love the first 2 books of Rain Wilds. Like I was all about the new
Yeah.
chapter of the story.
Let me
Okay,
put it
good.
this way. Rain Wilds, there are, because of the way it was marketed, there are people who read Rain Wilds having read nothing else by Robin Hobb and have then had to go back and read the rest of the series. Those people specifically, Rain Wilds is their favorite.
Okay.
And yet people who read the whole series and then got to Rain Wilds, it's their least favorite. So that gives you an idea of the standard of Hobb's writing. That if that's your entry point, it's amazing.
Okay. She's incredible. I'm having such a good time with Robin Hobb. I said over on my Instagram, I'm like, I'm 8 books from the end of this series, and I'm devastated already that I only have 8 books left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will arrange a time.
There
will
might
have
be more. There might be more coming though. So don't worry. She's most of the way through a couple new books in the world. So we'll
which I'm so excited about.
I think she signed a contract for one of them at least.
I'll finish and then I'll reach out.
Oh no, we will be in touch soon because you've just got to Fool's Fate. So as soon as you're done with Fool's Fate, we'll have a talk and we'll see how we go.
I think I said this to you before we started streaming. I've been loving taking those books slow. I don't think I've ever read a series as slowly as Robin Hobb. It's been 2 years since I started book 1. Every couple of months I'll pick up the next one, and it's the most beautiful way of doing it because you really do appreciate
Robin
how much
Hobb is a spa day, not a quick shower.
Yes.
It's you have to soak it in. You have to relish it.
I'm excited. Good.
All right. I think we probably
We've
need
kind of
to
run our course, haven't we? Yes.
This was great, David. Thanks so much for the invitation.
Yeah, and thanks for managing these time differences.
Oh my.
Yeah. Yes. Because we have.
I'm in New Zealand. You're in
Yep.
Kuwait, you were saying, and Ben's in the States. So
Yes.
we've covered the globe.
But Derri, I've got good news. Moving back to Japan in July, and what that means is you and me will be the only ones in the same.
Yeah.
I was speaking to someone else separately, and they're like, "When would you be free to kind of arrange like a regular?" And I'm like, "Listen, I'll be 16 hours ahead of you. We will get it done, but it will be a bit of wrangling."
Yeah.
But yeah,
I tend to say, okay, well, what time is it where you are? I mean, particularly for the States. I'm like, okay, I'm like 4 hours later than you, but yesterday.
Yes, yeah, that's what we're doing it
for me. Because I'm. What are we now? It's 11 a.m. No, sorry, it's 10 a.m. in the morning in New Zealand.
Midnight for me.
5 p.m. here.
Yeah. We've pretty much covered the clock here today. So.
But you know, and I'll leave you with this. When I did my master's, I did it online, and I was doing it in Japan, and I was doing it through a UK university. And,
oh my Lord.
And the lectures were at something like 4 a.m. Japan time. And every time I joined,
following the football is hard because daylight savings kicks in and it's a 2 a.m. kickoff.
I joined these lectures. The lecturer would always be like, "David, you know you don't have to be here. We understand." And I was like, I sit there groveling like this. Like, no, I will do it. I will get the learning I paid for.
Absolutely. All right.
Listen, guys, thank you very much for being here. We will be in touch about Robin Hobb, so I'm looking forward to that. Yeah. All right. And thanks for whoever's watching, whether you dropped in and out of the stream or you're watching it in retrospect. Thanks very much. And glurp glurp.
Glurp glurp.